because of bullying. So I talked to a member in Colorado recently, and she had pulled the 17-year-old son out of public school special ed because he was actually being harassed and bullied by the special education teacher. And then, I guess when the family complained, they basically pulled the child's support. They punished the child because the family advocated for their kid. What a concept, advocating for your child, right? So let's punish the kid. So the son was on the autism spectrum and has extreme emotional difficulty. So our team of consultants basically just helped the family come up with a plan and come up with, what are we going to do? This is a high school student. I don't even know how to begin. I don't know what curricula is out there that would be appropriate for a high school student with autism, and so we were able to help them. And then also, what's my transcript going to look like? And, what happens if and when we do decide, if we decide to put them back in school? I mean, just the whole gamut of questions. So that was just one little vignette of a member that I spoke with recently. But oftentimes it's the child being bullied by another child. This was a case where the student was being bullied by the teacher.
Thanks. I think the oddest call that I ever got on this particular one, homeschooling for bullying reasons, was a leader who was calling me because someone had approached their group they wanted to join. She and her wife had just started homeschooling because their kid was being beaten up at school because he had two moms. And so they withdrew to homeschool, wanted to join up with a support group. That was an interesting conversation. For health reasons, I'll start with one of these. I talked with a family out in North Dakota. And actually, if you're on our email list, you may have seen this one. We wrote an article about it just a few weeks ago. It was actually a grandmother. Mom was out of the picture, and so the grandmother was taking care of her daughter, who was 14 years old and had serious health issues. I mean, like, she would go into the hospital to get treatment, and it was a 6-week course of treatment, and she was doing this 3 times a year. And North Dakota public schools were not particularly interested in providing any sort of homebound instruction. Plus, part of the side effect was migraine headache, so it was kind of, you do homeschooling when you can do homeschooling. So she was homeschooling for health reasons, and she did want to have some interaction with the local support group for her daughter, but it really couldn't be on any regular basis because they were heading over to St. Paul, Minneapolis every few months for the hospital. Lanisser, can you tell us some about homeschooling for health reasons, families you talked to?
There's a tremendous spike on mental health, mental illness in teens today. I would say that the majority of the cases that I see with students who are academically doing well, so they're not coming out for academic issues, are usually dealing with issues of anxiety. We just had a case with a student who, thank God, she was ahead, so she was working on what they call an honors diploma. She ended up getting a basic because she'll have to spend her last semester in a special home for suicide prevention. So the health issues can also, it doesn't always have to be a special need or a particular health issue. It could also be mental health, and we're seeing a spike in that issue, with that age group, high school students who are under a lot of stress. And the strange thing about it is that we're also seeing a lot of younger children who are dealing with anxiety. And I'm sure it's tied also to, the bullying and things that are going on in the school. And so in that case, like Darren said, they can homeschool when they can homeschool, and it gives them an opportunity to process and deal with some of the mental health issues that are going on in the home.
Faith, what have you seen about some of the health reasons for homeschooling?
Well, over the last 6 weeks, I just basically went back through, call log, and we have talked to parents that have Lyme's disease. The parent has Lyme's disease, children have Lyme's disease. Talked to a parent with, the child was recently diagnosed with conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, epilepsy, see traumatic brain injury, anxiety and depression, big spike, and then chronic migraines as well. So last week I spoke with a member from Pennsylvania. She's new to the country. They just moved here from New Zealand. Her child has a rare genetic syndrome, and the school could not meet her needs. This homeschooling was never on this mother's radar at all. She basically feels forced because it's not going to, the school can't meet her child's needs. Besides the health issue, she was saying that her son was obviously struggling with some anxiety and depression, because oftentimes learning struggles and special needs will go hand in hand with anxiety and depression, and oftentimes we don't know what came first. Those things are coexisting frequently.
Thank you. Larissa, you had wanted to talk about some families who are choosing homeschooling kind of as a last option for social reasons. Can you talk some about that?
Right. In terms of, I know we discussed being in homeschooling. Are we talking mostly about the racism?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, if you want to talk some.
So, we started homeschooling at the end of my oldest daughter's 4th grade year. We were in a Christian private school, and there was a situation of isolation because there weren't many African American students in this school. And there was a situation where, they were doing Shirley English. And Shirley, how many of you guys remember Shirley English? And if you didn't start on Shirley English, you certainly could not do Shirley English. And it was obvious that some new students would be struggling, but it just happened to not be my daughter. And she ended up with a D on her report card. And of course, I asked to speak with the teacher. I guess I was homeschooling. I didn't realize how the Lord was calling me at that time. And so I had every paper. I thought either that or my kid, chucked the paper on the way home, and I didn't know about it because I had never seen a D. And so I questioned the teacher, and the teacher says, well, you can't ask for a meeting. Only your husband can ask for a meeting. So my husband said, well, okay. And so my husband said, well, we would love a meeting. And the school said, and I guess, I don't know, they thought for a day and thought, we're not going to meet with either one of you. We inadvertently gave her a D. It's supposed to be a B. And for the first time in my whole life, I began to think, this is not going to work. We were spending about $20,000 in private education. And so my husband, who's in law enforcement, when we started homeschooling, we went from $20,000 to maybe 500 in overpriced books for that year. And he kept saying, is this legal? Is this legal? That's how our homeschool life started. And at the time, I think I had 3 children. We had 3 children. I was pregnant with baby number 4 at the time. And so when we talk about, racism, we realized that there was a situation, at that particular school, at that particular church, and it's real for people, the isolation. When we came into homeschooling, one of the reasons why we started the Calvary Gospel Home Educators is because then when we came into homeschooling, my kids said, oh, I don't have any friends. I could be in a room with 200 homeschoolers, and everybody kind of has their clique. And they never had any friends. And I thought, for the first time, I thought, oh, they're right. So we're in homeschooling and we're away from this particular situation, but we have another. One of the things that we do, by the way, at Calvary's, we do what's called a homeschool huddle. And it's just something that, how when the parents are sitting around in that traditional homeschool setting, where we open up the mic and people can get a chance to meet each other. We have name tags this year where it's blue if you're returning to Calvary, it's red if you're new, and it talks about how long you've been homeschooling and the ages of your kids so that people can get connected. And I think we have to be very intentional about that, because in order to service new homeschoolers coming in, everybody wants to feel connected and being a part. And so I think as association leaders and leaders in homeschooling, we always have to think of how you would feel. How would you feel if you were in this situation? If you had to walk into a room and it's someone of a completely different background, what would you want? And sometimes it's not everybody's strength, but perhaps you can have people who are planted to say, you're the greeter, to the new people coming in, and who have more experience than others. And we have to be very intentional. So from that, certainly loving this homeschool group that had been around for about 20 years, and it certainly wasn't anything outside of those kinds of things that was going on, that we decided to create one where anybody could come in. And we opened up the door. I'll be talking a little bit more about what goes on at Calvary, but opening up the door so that people feel welcome and that people feel valued. And sometimes it's not even intentional. It's just, you have your friends and that's it. So I also wanted to touch on the difference between reasons for homeschooling for ethnicity versus racism. So ethnicity would be, hey, I don't see my name in the book, did our race start at Harriet Tubman? Did we exist before Harriet Tubman? Because the books kind of start there, right? It's like, the Underground Railroad was the first, and so African Americans are very sensitive to that, and I think that is a big wave of people who are saying, hey, I want to take back, the real truth about my history. And we have a beautiful African American Museum of History and Culture now in Washington, D.C. What a beautiful work of art. I'll invite you to it. Our family is featured on the 3rd floor because we own a home. We own one of the only African American beaches in Virginia. And my husband's family were slaves on this property, and so it's been passed down, and it's a real big deal. And so one day a week we go there to homeschool. So you know how when you're around non-homeschoolers, they're like, are they supposed to be in school? I was like, this is school. We're cutting grass, and we're planting strawberries, and we have a grill master on the grill. We got kayaks, we got bikes, and that's just what our homeschool looks like one day a week. And they have what we call sit down with grandma. She just recently passed this past June. But these 4 years that we had a chance to do that has been priceless. And so, and then we got a chance to learn about what the fishermen, because our grandfather, great-grandfather was a fisherman, and what that looked like. We're actually going to be in a crabbing class. The kids are going to be taking a class on, crabbing, because this was a way of life. And so I just made it into a study of your history. Like, this is your story. My side of the family is from New Jersey, so it's a completely different experience when they're on my side and we go all the way up north. But it's a nice balance for the children. And so for ethnic reasons, homeschooling is big for us. We happen to have been baptizing people on our beach for the past 40 years. That's why we're in the museum. We just reached 50 years on this past August, 3rd week in August. It's a really big deal. We flew drones in over the property, just getting aerial shots of this. And so we've been having what we call the annual baptism on the beach. And so all of that is a part of their history, when you want to be able to pass on a legacy. And for all of you, it's not just a black thing, it's a thing. Everybody has a story. And so the difference between ethnic reasons and racism could be completely different. It could be completely different. And my husband, who's in law enforcement, they just brought in 400 Metropolitan Police officers in the African American Museum for sensitivity training, right? They want the officers to have sensitivity training. And they said, the past hurts, but it can also heal. And so sometimes you may be attracting people who are coming in and they're hurt. And it might not just be your, minority group, it could be anyone. They've come from bullying, they've come from, health issues, they've come from ethnic issues, they come from racism issues, and they're coming into these groups and they're hurting. And one of the things that when we're on the phone, I'm one of the high school consultants, is that we have to listen. Homeschoolers like to talk, don't we?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And you're just listening, and everyone has a different story. And so even if, this is maybe a solution, even if there is a time for, like I said, that homeschool huddle open mic where people get a chance to tell their story, or their why, or share their curriculum, and it gives the homeschooling a voice. So I could go on and on about this subject, but I thank you.
I was introduced to homeschooling for ethnic reasons back a few years ago when a lady in Tennessee contacted us because she was having problems withdrawing from the public school. It wasn't, no, she was Native American, I think specifically Cherokee. And it wasn't that they had been facing racial issues in the public school, it was that there wasn't any discussion of the Cherokee tribes in Tennessee, of all places. And so she said, I want my kids to know their history. And so we contacted the school and got them off her back, and she was delighted. And she sent along a little statue that I've got on my desk with a little note on the bottom saying, "Thank you for allowing me to pass on the dreams of my people to my children." All right, Faith, can you talk a bit about special needs reasons why parents may see this as the last option?
I'll say about that.
Yes, let's not do that.
Okay, no. Well, just a little synopsis. Again, families are choosing to homeschool special needs because of mental health. ADD or ADHD is a huge reason. The medical issues I already mentioned. Many families have kiddos with developmental delays. Autism is on the rise. I would say the bulk of our calls and emails come from families who are homeschooling children with autism, dyslexia. But then we also have twice exceptional, where we have gifted students, but they're gifted, but they also have learning challenges. So obviously homeschooling is an individualized education plan. That's the beauty of homeschooling, because it's individualized. So let me see here. I do want to bring to your attention, there was an interesting study done in 2002 by Duffy, and it was a national survey, and they found the top diagnoses. They did 121 surveys, and the top diagnoses were ADD, learning disabilities, autism, and then speech and language. But other studies by other researchers have found epilepsy, visual impairments, intellectual disabilities, hearing impairments, or deafness as motivating reasons why they chose to homeschool. So last week I got to talk with a parent who was homeschooling her child because she was blind. I have met deaf parents who are homeschooling, kids who can hear, and then vice versa. So, I mean, you name it, it's out there, okay? All these different reasons. And so we want to equip you and help you to find answers, and that's one of the reasons why HSLDA has special needs staff.
Thank you. So I'm going to exercise moderator privilege and do the last one on the list, which actually is written here, and that's homeschooling for religious reasons, but as a last option. And if you come from New York and California, you probably know what I'm talking about. Both states recently changed their laws regarding vaccination to make it so that you could no longer object to vaccination for religious reasons. You can still get a note from a doctor, although California is cutting down on that even more now. But it has led to a lot more people contacting HSLDA because they want to homeschool. Well, they think they have to homeschool because they aren't sending their kids to school due to their religious convictions. And what's left? Both California and New York have slammed the door on the public schools and private schools. So that leaves tutors, which can be expensive and hard to find, and homeschooling, which can be hard to do if you're being forced into it as a last option. So I've talked with a number of groups who are getting floods of new homeschoolers, and this is not their first option. One more that I wanted to address briefly before we go on is